My mother-in-law called me a parasite at my daughter's birthday party. Now she's furious I moved away without telling her where. Nothing about my life looked dramatic from the outside when things actually started to crack, which is probably why it took me so long to admit that something was really wrong. From the street, our little house looked like any other small place near a military base in the middle of the country, with the patchy grass, the plastic toys in the yard, and the crooked porch light my husband kept saying he would fix when he got back. Inside, it was just me, our daughter, and a whole lot of bills that did not care that there was a pandemic or that he was on the other side of the world pretending everything at home was fine. The house was technically mine on paper, bought before we got married with a small inheritance, but it felt like ours until it started feeling like a cage. I kept telling myself that I was holding it together, that other people had it worse, that I should be grateful we at least had a roof and food, even if sometimes food meant random pantry combinations that absolutely did not go together. Before everything went sideways, I worked at a small daycare. It was not glamorous, it did not pay a fortune, but it was steady, and I was good at it. I liked the routine of little shoes and sticky hands and kids telling me wild stories about dinosaurs and superheroes. Then the virus hit, and overnight normal life turned into this bizarre blur of closures and rules and fear. The daycare shut down temporarily, which everyone knows is code for, you will not see a paycheck again. My husband had already deployed. Our daughter was still little, and suddenly the tiny cushion we had in savings was shrinking faster than I could breathe. I remember standing in the kitchen one night, staring at the overdue notice on the electric bill, thinking this cannot be my life, I am too young to be this tired. I started selling things online, little by little at first. An old chair, a box of clothes that did not fit anymore, the set of dishes I got as a wedding gift that I never really liked. Anything that was not nailed down was up for negotiation, because groceries do not care about sentimental value. I picked up random babysitting through a neighborhood app whenever someone trusted a desperate stranger with a profile picture and a few references. Some weeks it was enough to keep us afloat. Other weeks I was counting coins in the glove compartment of my car to put gas in the tank. I did what everybody does when they are drowning quietly in their own house. I smiled on video calls, posted a carefully cropped picture of my daughter playing, and pretended my stomach was not in knots every time my phone buzzed with another bill reminder. That was around when my mother-in-law decided to become the main character of my life. She had never liked me much, but before the pandemic, she was at least subtle about it. A sigh here, a passive comment there, little digs about how I folded towels or how I seasoned food. Once money got tight, it was like a switch flipped. Every conversation somehow circled back to how I needed to pull my weight, like I was lounging on a beach somewhere, not sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. refreshing job listings that all required degrees I did not have. She started dropping little comments every time we saw her. Things like, "So when are you planning to go back to work?" said in that fake casual tone that is absolutely not casual. Or, some women take advantage of military benefits," followed by a smile that did not touch her eyes. The worst part was that my husband was not here to see any of it. Over video calls, he would see his mother on her best behavior, asking about our daughter and telling him she was dropping off food for us, so I did not have to worry. He would see me sitting on the couch looking tired, but trying not to show how those little digs were carving grooves into my sanity. When I tried to bring it up, he would say things like, "She just does not understand working from home," even before I actually managed to get a job working from home, and it always ended with some version of, "She means well, she is just traditional." Traditional is a cute word for controlling, by the way. Eventually, after what felt like 1,000 applications and 300 rejection emails, I landed a remote job with a small company that did customer support. It was nothing fancy, but it paid better than the daycare, and I could do it from the little desk I set up in the corner of the living room next to the window. I cried after I got the email saying I had been hired, not because it was my dream job, but because stability suddenly did not feel like a fairy tale anymore. I had a schedule, a login, a paycheck, and for the first time in months, I did not feel like I was balancing on the edge of a cliff every time I opened my banking app. My mother-in-law, of course, had opinions. She did not say, "Congratulations," or "I am happy for you." She said, "So you are going to be sitting at home all day on the computer?" Like I had just told her I was joining a pyramid scheme. She made comments about how real work meant leaving the house and how these online things were not reliable. When I tried to explain that I had a supervisor, meetings, metrics, all the normal job stuff, she just smiled and said, "If you say so," which somehow stung more than if she had just called me lazy to my face. My husband, when I told him, said he was proud of me, but you could tell he did not really get what I did either. I think in his head I was just answering random emails in my pajamas all day while our daughter played quietly, which, spoiler, is not how it looked at all. The really fun part was that we lived 10 minutes away from my mother-in-law. Before he deployed, my husband had given her a key to our house, just for emergencies, which sounded reasonable in theory. In practice, emergency somehow became whenever she wanted to drop something off or felt like checking in. At first, it was small things. I would be in the kitchen and hear the door open, and she would call out, "It is just me." Like that made it less weird that she was inside my house uninvited. She would bring over leftovers or random bargains she found at the store, which I appreciated on the days when money was tight. But there was always a price. A comment, a little inspection, a question about what I was doing with the money her son sent home. The day I realized the key was going to become a serious problem, I was on a video call with a supervisor. It was one of those important meetings where you know they are watching your camera and your background and judging whether you look like someone who has their life together. I had my daughter set up with a cartoon and snacks in the bedroom. My hair was semi-decent, and I was actually feeling like maybe I could pull this off. Halfway through the call, the front door opened and slammed shut. No knock, no text first, just full volume entrance. My mother-in-law's voice came floating down the hallway, nice and loud. "Hello? Is anyone home?" I swear my soul left my body for a second. I muted my microphone, plastered a smile on my face for my boss, and tried to wave off the noise like it was nothing. Meanwhile, she was walking around the living room asking why there were papers all over the table and what they were, and did my son know I was messing with financial documents. They were literally printouts from my job about procedures. But sure, let us make it sound like I was laundering money. When she got close enough to see my computer, she leaned into my camera frame before I could stop her and asked loudly, "Is this that fake job you told me about?" I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. After I somehow survived that call without getting fired, I snapped. Not in a dramatic screaming way, just in that quiet, deadly way you do when you cannot take one more tiny violation. I told her, as calmly as I could, that she had to stop coming in without knocking. I told her that the key was for emergencies, and that emergency does not mean I feel like dropping by. She tilted her head and gave me that sweet older lady expression she uses in front of strangers, and said, "Your husband gave me that key. If he wants it back, he will ask for it." I told her that this was my house too, that I worked here, that she put my job at risk, and that from now on she needed to call before coming over. She shrugged, said something about me being sensitive, and changed the subject to how dusty the ceiling fan was. That night I locked the door with the little chain at the top, the one you cannot open from the outside even with a key. And I did not feel guilty. I knew she would be offended if she found it locked. But at that point I was more afraid of losing my job than hurting her feelings. My husband, when I told him, said she did not mean to interrupt, and suggested I just let her know my schedule. I told him again that the issue was not the interruption, it was the boundaries. I do not know if he actually heard me. The problem with people like my mother-in-law is that they are amazing at performing kindness in public while doing damage in private. Around other family members, she was the loving grandmother who dropped off home-cooked food and helped the poor young wife while her brave son was serving. Alone with me, she was a critic with a magnifying glass, inspecting how I spent every dollar and how I arranged condiments in the fridge. She would say things like, "Back in my day, women did not expect their husbands to do everything," which was funny because her husband had basically abandoned her when my husband was a kid. That detail somehow never made it into her speeches. The first time she joked publicly about me being a gold digger, I honestly thought I had misheard. It happened during a video call with my husband. He was somewhere far away, wearing his uniform, the background blurred, and his whole side of the family was on the screen. His mother had come over so she could be in the call, too. She sat on the edge of my couch like she owned it, smiling at the camera and talking over me every time I tried to answer a question. At some point, one of his cousins asked how I was handling everything with him gone, and before I could open my mouth, my mother-in-law laughed and said, "Oh, she is fine. She married into a stable paycheck. She is living the dream." Everyone kind of laughed, that awkward little laugh people do when they do not know if something is a joke. I froze. My husband chuckled and said, "Mom," in that warning tone, but he was smiling, so it did not exactly feel like a defense. I kept waiting for him to say something like, "That is not funny," or "That is not true," and it never came. The call moved on. People talked about the weather and sports and whatever else, and I sat there with my cheeks burning, smiling at the camera while my brain replayed her words on a loop. After everyone signed off, I asked my husband if he thought what she said was okay. I was trying to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. He said she was just joking and that I was extra sensitive lately. Extra sensitive is another cute phrase that means your feelings are an inconvenience. I told him that I did not appreciate being called a gold digger in front of half his relatives. He said, she did not say that exactly, which is technically true, but emotionally useless. I tried to explain that she had been making those comments for months, and that they were not harmless. He said he would talk to her, but his talks with her usually turned into her crying and him apologizing to her, so I did not hold my breath. The text started a little while later. My mother-in-law began sending me articles and posts about military wives who overspend and how to spot women who marry for benefits. At first, she framed it as educational. She would say, "Just thought this was interesting," or, "I know this does not apply to you, but look what is out there." Every link felt like a pointed finger. I stopped responding with more than one or two words, because if I pushed back, she would act offended and tell my husband I was being rude. At some point, there was a switch in my head where her house stopped feeling like a place I visited and started feeling like enemy territory. I would stand in her kitchen while she told some story about how hard it had been raising my husband on her own and how she never had help, and every sentence sounded like an accusation that I was not suffering enough. I felt judged for every grocery run, every online order, every toy I bought our daughter. It did not matter that I was working again, that I logged hours and brought in money. In her mind, anything I did that did not match her idea of sacrifice meant I was using her son. The day everything boiled over between us was not some huge dramatic event like you see in movies. There was no thrown dinner plate, no storming out in the rain. It was my daughter's birthday, and the party was just a small thing in our backyard. Pandemic or not, I wanted her to have something that felt special, so I strung some cheap decorations around the fence, baked a cake from a box, and invited a few neighbors with kids we saw at the playground. I told my mother-in-law she was welcome to come, which I kind of regret now, but at the time I still believed we could keep things civil for the sake of my daughter. She showed up already irritated, which you could tell from the way she held her mouth and the way she talked too loud about traffic and how the neighborhood used to be better before people started renting out every other house. She brought a big present for my daughter and then positioned herself under the shade of the only decent tree, where a couple of adults were talking. I was running around making sure kids had juice boxes and that nobody fell off the little plastic slide. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my friend from down the street walk away from my mother-in-law with this look on her face that I know very well now. That, oh no, she did not just say that. Look. Later, when the cake was cut and the kids were destroying the wrapping paper mountain, my friend pulled me aside near the kitchen. She asked, "Are you okay?" in that careful tone, and my stomach dropped. That is never a casual question at a birthday party. She told me quietly that my mother-in-law had been telling people I did not have a real job, that I just sat at home spending my husband's paycheck, and that the work I did on the computer was just an excuse to avoid getting a proper job. She said my mother-in-law called me a parasite. She actually used that word, parasite, at my daughter's birthday party, in my backyard. I wish I could say I marched right over there and told her to leave, but I did not. I looked out the window and saw my daughter laughing with icing on her face, and I swallowed everything. I decided in that moment that nothing she said was going to ruin my child's day. So I smiled like my heart was not pounding in my ears, fixed the frosting that was sliding off the cake, and got through the rest of the party. I laughed at jokes, posed for photos, and when my mother-in-law left, I thanked her for coming, because I am apparently capable of high-level emotional gymnastics when children are involved. That night, after my daughter finally fell asleep with a new stuffed animal clutched to her chest, I sat on the couch in the dark and stared at the television without hearing a word. Something in me was done. Not tired, not worn out, not offended. Done. I realized that I had been rearranging my entire life around this woman's opinion of me, and no matter what I did, she was always going to see me as someone who did not deserve the life I had. I was not going to be able to fix her view of me by being nice anymore. That was when I started looking for a way out that was not just emotional, but physical. Once the idea of putting real distance between me and my mother-in-law landed in my brain, it would not leave. It sat there, humming quietly in the background while I answered emails for work, while I packed my daughter's lunch, while I politely listened to my husband talk about things on base. The thought was simple and terrifying at the same time. What if we did not live here anymore? Not just in a different house nearby, but far enough away that my mother-in-law could not just appear in my living room with a key and an opinion. At first, I tried to shove it down. Moving felt impossible. My husband was away, my daughter loved her school, and I was just finally getting the hang of my remote job. It felt selfish to even consider uprooting everything just because I could not figure out how to handle his mother. But then I saw this listing online for a job that was almost too perfect. Same type of customer service work I was already doing, but for a slightly bigger company, with better pay, actual benefits, and an office located about 2 hours away. 2 hours might not sound like much, but when you are dealing with someone who thinks your front door is optional, 2 hours is the difference between suffocating and breathing. I applied without telling anyone. It felt a little like cheating, like I was having an emotional affair with a future where I did not have to constantly brace for my mother-in-law's next entrance. The interview process was weirdly smooth. A video call, a follow-up, a test assignment that I did at my kitchen table after my daughter went to bed. Every time an email came in, my heart jumped. When the offer finally showed up in my inbox, I sat at the table and stared at it for a long time. It felt like a life raft and a bomb at the same time. The salary was better, the schedule was predictable, and I could either commute 4 hours a day and slowly lose my mind, or I could move. I walked around the house looking at it like it was already a memory. The worn spot on the couch where my daughter liked to climb, the dent in the hallway from when we tried to move the dresser by ourselves, the little height marks on the pantry door frame. This house had been our first home as a family, but it had also become the stage for every humiliation my mother-in-law had delivered. Every corner had an echo of her voice sneaking in with that key, telling me I was not enough, not grateful enough, not hardworking enough, not the right kind of wife. By the time I got back to the table, the decision was made. I accepted the job. Telling my husband about it over video call was nerve-wracking in a way I was not expecting. I thought he would be thrilled that I had gotten a better job. He was, in a way, but he was also practical. He started asking about logistics, distance, commute time, our daughter's school, the housing market. I gave him the numbers, all spelled out and honest. By the end of the call, he said he was proud of me and that we would figure it out together. He did not say, "Do not sell the house," or "absolutely move," which I guess left the door open for whatever I decided. It also kept him in that comfortable neutral space he likes to live in where he does not have to choose between me and his mother. Here is the thing that my mother-in-law never fully understood, and honestly my husband did not either. The house we were living in was mine. I had bought it before we got married with a small inheritance and a lot of scraping, and when we decided to live near his base, it made sense to use it. His name was not on the paperwork. His money helped with bills and maintenance, obviously, but legally, the property was mine. I had always felt a little guilty about that, like it made me selfish to have something that was just mine in a marriage. But being on the receiving end of so many lectures about how I was allegedly using her son's money kind of cured me of that guilt. I started talking to a real estate agent, quietly. I told her I needed discretion. No big for sale sign in the yard, no loud open houses. We scheduled appointments when my mother-in-law was at work or at her church group. I cleaned like a maniac before each showing, hiding anything that made the house look too lived in. The agent suggested some updates, little things that would make the place more appealing, and I did what I could with the limited budget and energy I had. All the while, my daughter thought I was just fixing up the house to make it nicer. And my mother-in-law thought I was finally listening to her constant comments about how I should take more pride in my home. There was a little metal lockbox hanging by the front door that held the key for the agent and buyers, and every time I looked at it, I felt like I had a secret weapon. My mother-in-law still had her copy of the key, of course, and my husband still thought that was reasonable. I told him she was abusing the privilege. He told me to be patient, and I decided that patience had officially left the building. I could not stop her from using the key while we were still there, but I could make sure that one day she would drive over, shove it into the lock, and realize it did not work anymore. The guilt did not disappear just because I had a plan. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about how mad my husband was going to be when he found out I had moved forward with selling the house without looping his mother in. I spun every scenario in my head. In some, he sided with me completely. In others, he felt betrayed. Occasionally, in the really dark versions, he filed for divorce from overseas and made me the villain in his story. I still kept moving. I knew if I told my mother-in-law anything before the sale was at least mostly in motion, she would do everything in her power to sabotage it. She already felt entitled to every aspect of our lives. I could only imagine what she would do if she knew I was trying to physically take her son and granddaughter out of her orbit. My daughter started to ask more questions when she saw strangers walking through the house, touching her toys, opening closets. I told her they were people helping mommy with grown-up stuff. Kids are smarter than we think. I could see in her eyes that she knew something big was coming, One night, she asked me why Grandma could come into our house whenever she wanted, but our neighbors could not. I did not know how to explain boundary violations to a 6-year-old, so I just said that sometimes adults forget to knock, and that it was okay to lock the door if she ever felt uncomfortable. It hurt that I even had to say that about someone who was technically family. The real estate agent texted me updates at odd hours. Interest here, a question there, a second showing scheduled. Every little ping made my heart race. I handled paperwork in the tiny pockets of quiet between work calls and bedtime stories, sliding documents into a folder that I kept hidden in the back of the closet behind old coats. Every time I heard a car door outside, I paused and listened, ready to shove the folder under the bed if my mother-in-law decided it was an emergency day. Living like that, half hiding in your own home, is exhausting. I do not recommend it. There was a moment, in the middle of all of this, when I stood in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink, and thought, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I should just let it go. Maybe moving is too much. Maybe I am being dramatic. Then I remembered my friend whispering the word parasite to me in my own kitchen, and the way my daughter flinched when my mother-in-law barged in without knocking, and the way my husband could not bring himself to say anything stronger than mom when she insulted me in front of the whole family. That doubt dissolved into something else. Not anger exactly. Determination. I was not trying to cut my husband off from his family. I was trying to keep my own little family from collapsing under the weight of one woman's need to control everything. If that meant making decisions he would not love at first, then maybe that was the price. I told myself that once the sale was done, once we were settled somewhere new and the dust had settled, we would talk it through. Maybe he would understand in hindsight. Maybe he would even thank me for finally drawing a line neither of us seemed capable of drawing when we were standing in his mother's living room. I held on to that version of the future like it was a lifeline. All I had to do was keep my secret long enough to get us out. I genuinely believed I could pull that off. I forgot one simple thing. My mother-in-law treats curiosity like a sport. Of course, the universe decided that the day my mother-in-law found out about the house sale would be a day when I was already hanging on by a thread. I had been up late with a work issue. My daughter had a meltdown over her favorite shirt being in the laundry, and my coffee machine decided to die at the worst possible time. By the time the real estate agent texted to say she had dropped off some updated flyers and left them on the dining table after a showing, I was already stressed. I did not think twice about it. I figured I would tuck them into my secret folder later, after finishing my shift. I was in the middle of a call with a customer who wanted to yell at someone about a shipping delay when I heard the front door open. My stomach twisted. I had locked the chain, but apparently at some point that morning, in the chaos of getting my daughter to school, I had forgotten to latch it. I heard my mother-in-law's voice float down the hallway, bright and chirpy like nails on a chalkboard. "It is just me," she called out, like that made it better. I muted myself and stepped away from the computer with my headset still on, heart racing. I tried to keep my tone neutral. "I am working. You cannot just walk in," I said. She brushed past me into the dining room like I was a piece of furniture. On the table were the flyers the agent had left, glossy pictures of our house with phrases like "motivated seller" in bold letters. I felt my blood run cold. She picked one up and stared at it for a second, her face changing in slow motion. "What is this?" she asked, her voice lower now. I opened my mouth to respond, and heard the customer in my headset ask if I was still there. My brain split in half. I unmuted and promised the customer I would be right back, then muted again. "It is what it looks like," I said. "I am selling the house." The silence that fell in that room was heavy. Then she exploded. "You are doing what?" she yelled. I flinched and gestured at my headset, mouthing, "I am working," but she did not care. She waved the flyer in my face and said, "This is my son's house. You cannot just sell it behind his back." I reminded her, as calmly as I could, that the house was in my name, that I had bought it before we got married, and that I had already spoken to a lawyer who walked me through exactly what I could do. If my husband's signature was needed for anything, it would be handled remotely and properly, but the house was mine to sell. That did not matter to her. In her mind, anything that touched her son's life was hers to control. She accused me of trying to steal his investment, of planning to run off and take her granddaughter somewhere she could not visit. The irony of that last part was rich, considering she had been treating my house like a waiting room she owned for years. The customer on my headset was asking if I had solved their issue yet. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told my mother-in-law we would talk later, that I had to get back to work, and I asked her to leave. She ignored me. She said she was not going anywhere until I called her son so she could hear what he had to say about this. I told her he already knew about the job, that I was not doing anything reckless. And she scoffed, saying, "He does not know you are selling his home out from under him." I do not know how I got through the rest of that shift. I half expected my boss to call and say, "What on earth was that?" But somehow the call quality must have held up enough. By the time I logged out, my mother-in-law was gone, but my phone was full of texts and missed calls. She had sent long paragraphs about betrayal and disrespect, about how she gave up everything to raise her son only for him to marry a woman who would take him away. It was a full emotional performance with all the greatest hits. I did something very rare for me. I did not respond. I screenshotted everything and dropped it into a folder labeled "just in case," because even in the middle of my own meltdown, a small part of me was already thinking about documentation. I blocked her number for 24 hours just so I could think without my phone buzzing every 30 seconds. Then I called a locksmith and booked the earliest appointment to change every lock on the house. When my husband and I finally got a chance to talk, he already knew. Of course he did. His mother had called him sobbing and told him I was selling his house and throwing her out of our lives. He sounded tired when he answered, like he had been listening to her for a while before calling me. I explained the situation in detail. The job, the money, the attempts to set boundaries with his mother, the intrusions, the birthday comments, the constant disrespect. I told him that I had every legal right to sell, and that I genuinely believed moving was what we needed. He listened quietly, which was both good and bad. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, "I understand why you are upset with her, but making a decision like this without telling her is a lot." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I could not believe we were having a conversation about her feelings in the middle of all this. I said, "I am your wife. I told you. She is not the one living here. I do not owe her a checklist." He said he was not taking sides, that he wanted everyone to feel heard, that maybe if I had looped her in, it would not have escalated like this. That was when it hit me again. He truly believed there was a version of events where his mother would have calmly accepted us moving away if only I had found the right tone. That call did not end with a resolution. It ended with both of us exhausted and nothing actually settled, which somehow made everything feel even worse. I hung up with a migraine and a sense that I was more alone than I had ever been in that little house. The locksmith came the next day. Watching him switch out the locks felt both empowering and terrifying. I knew my mother-in-law would see it as an act of war. I also knew that if she had respected the boundary of the original key, I would not have had to take that step. The new keys were small and shiny and fit perfectly into the new locks. I slid one onto my keyring and taped the spare inside a cabinet that my daughter could not reach yet. The next time my mother-in-law tried to use her old key, she would find out the hard way that the door did not open for her anymore. I did not plan to be standing there when it happened. Part of me wanted to see her face, but a bigger part of me was tired of watching her treat my life like something she had the right to edit. I just wanted her on the other side of a door that she did not control. If this were a neat little story, that would have been the climax. I would have changed the locks, moved away, and maybe my husband would have had some big epiphany about loyalty and chosen me fully. Unfortunately, real life does not care about tidy plot structure. My mother-in-law was not the kind of person who saw a locked door as a signal to back off. She saw it as a challenge. And because my husband could not fully let go of the idea that she was just a concerned parent who went too far sometimes, he was still the bridge between us. He just did not realize how much damage that bridge was letting through. The thing about planning your escape while someone else is actively trying to tighten their grip on your life is that you end up living in this weird limbo where every day feels like both progress and backsliding at the same time. On paper, things were moving. The house had a couple of serious offers. My new job had sent over onboarding paperwork, and I was slowly packing up non-essential stuff into boxes I labeled with vague words like kitchen and office things, so my daughter would not panic. Emotionally, I felt like I was stuck in one of those nightmares where you are running through molasses while someone yells after you. My mother-in-law did not take the lock change well, obviously. The first time she discovered it, she called my husband and cried about how she had been locked out of her own son's home, which is technically impressive as a sentence when you think about how many wrong things are packed into it. My husband called me afterward, frustrated, asking why I had not told him I was changing the locks. I reminded him of the conversation we had about boundaries and how his mother had walked into my workspace and almost cost me my job. He said something about communication, and I had to hang up before I said something I could not unsay. I did send him pictures of the texts she had been sending, the ones accusing me of stealing his future and turning his daughter against her. I do not think he fully read them. People have this interesting ability to skim the parts of reality that are too uncomfortable. He kept coming back to, "She should not have called you a parasite, but you know how she is." Like that personality trait was an unchangeable law of nature. Meanwhile, I was the one being asked to adjust my reactions, to be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. When the house finally went under contract, a weird calm settled over me. There was still a ton of work to do with inspections and paperwork and timelines, but the hardest part, the decision to leave, was not hypothetical anymore. I found an apartment in the new city that was not fancy, but had enough room for my daughter to have her own little space and for me to set up a real desk. I signed a short-term lease so we would have somewhere to land while I figured out more permanent housing. It felt like building a bridge in midair, but at least there was something on the other side to aim for. I kept our move plans quiet from my mother-in-law because at that point, every interaction with her felt like stepping into a minefield. My daughter knew we were going to move to mommy's new job city, and she was excited and nervous in that way kids are when they sense a big shift but do not fully understand what it means. I tried to keep the focus on the positive. New park, new school, new room to decorate. I did not mention less yelling or no more surprise visits. That was for me. My mother-in-law, of course, tried to gather information. She would send messages asking what our plans were and throwing in statements about how it would be cruel to take her granddaughter so far away from her. I answered with vague phrases about still figuring things out and waiting for everything to be finalized. She ramped up the guilt, saying things like, "I am getting older, you know," and "One day you will wish you had not kept her from me." I did not respond to those at all. If I had, I probably would have said something I could not take back. It was around this time that my daughter's school called me in the middle of my workday. I remember staring at the number on my phone thinking, please let this be about a field trip permission slip and not something serious. The secretary's voice sounded tight, that careful tone people use when they know parents are about to panic. She told me my daughter had been picked up early by her grandmother, who said there was a family emergency and that she had permission. My brain short-circuited. I had not given anyone permission. I had not even known my mother-in-law was planning to go to the school. I asked the secretary to repeat herself, thinking maybe I had misheard. She confirmed it. My daughter had left with her paternal grandmother, who was listed on the emergency contact form. That was the moment I realized my husband had added her to that list, without telling me. I felt this cold terror wash over me, not the dramatic kind where you scream and drop the phone, but the quiet kind where your hands go numb and your thoughts narrow down to one single point. Where is my kid? I tried calling my mother-in-law. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I texted. Nothing. I called my husband even though I knew he was on a completely different schedule and might not answer. I left a message that was basically one long, shaky sentence. Then I grabbed my keys and drove straight to my mother-in-law's house, heart pounding the whole way. Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. Car accident. A trip out of town. My mother-in-law deciding that since I was stealing my daughter away, she would get there first. The rational part of my brain knew she loved her granddaughter in her own twisted way. But rational does not really show up when you think your child has been taken without your consent. Her car was not in the driveway when I pulled up. I hammered on the front door anyway. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. I drove back to the school just in case there had been some kind of mix-up, but of course there had not. I called the district office to figure out what their policy even was for releasing kids to relatives. They told me as long as someone was on the approved list, the staff could release the child unless they had a court order saying otherwise. Court order. 2 words I had never thought I would need in relation to my own kid and her grandmother. It took about an hour of me calling everyone I could think of, driving pointless circles around town and crying in my parked car before I finally called the police. I told the dispatcher that my daughter had been picked up from school by someone I did not authorize, that the person was her grandmother, and that I could not reach either of them. I gave them names, addresses, descriptions. The officer on the other end of the line was calm. They said they would treat it as a family dispute rather than a kidnapping, but that they would send someone to talk to my mother-in-law and check on my daughter. I agreed, even though every part of me wanted it to be labeled something more serious. Those 3 hours between that call and my daughter walking back through my mother-in-law's front door felt like 3 years. A police car was already there when they pulled up, and I was standing in the yard with my heart in my throat. My daughter hopped out of the car holding a little shopping bag and said, "Mom, Grandma took me to get ice cream and new shoes." Like this had been a fun surprise outing. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, looked shocked to see the police. She kept saying, "This is ridiculous. I am her grandmother. I have every right." And the officer had to explain patiently that taking a child out of school without telling the actual parent was not okay. They did not arrest her. I knew they probably would not, but a small petty part of me kind of wanted them to put handcuffs on her anyway, just so she could feel what real consequences looked like. Instead, they took a statement from me, a statement from her, and filed a report. The officer pulled me aside afterward and said, "If you are worried this might happen again, you might want to talk to a lawyer about formal custody arrangements and maybe a restraining order." Hearing those words from someone in uniform made everything feel both more real and more absurd. I was standing in my mother-in-law's yard holding my daughter's hand, listening to a stranger tell me how to protect my child from a woman who claimed to love her more than anything. I called my husband that night and told him everything. For once, he did not try to smooth it over. He sounded genuinely shaken. He said, "She did what?" 3 times, each one louder. He called his mother and lit into her in a way I had never heard before. I could hear her yelling through the phone when he put it on speaker for a second, saying things like, "I was just spending time with my granddaughter," and "Your wife is turning you against your own mother." He told her if she ever took our daughter anywhere without my knowledge again, he would cut off contact. It sounded good, but there was still this nagging knowledge in the back of my mind that I had heard versions of "I will talk to her" before. For a few days after that, things were quiet. My mother-in-law did not call, did not text, did not show up at the house. The school updated their file so that only I was allowed to authorize early pickup. I wrote an email to the district complaining about their policy and got a carefully worded apology in return, promising to review their procedures. I added that email to my growing just-in-case folder. The house sale moved forward. The moving date got closer. I kept working, packing, parenting, breathing. I made it to the other side of that crisis, but something in me had shifted. I realized that as long as my husband kept giving his mother information and access, I would be stuck playing defense. That realization hurt more than any insult she had thrown at me. Moving day did not feel triumphant. It felt like doing surgery on my own life without anesthesia. I watched strangers carry boxes out of the house, each one full of pieces of the life I had tried to build there. And it hit me that even though I wanted to leave, I had still poured years of effort into making that place feel like home. My daughter bounced between excitement and tears, one moment talking about how she was going to organize her new room, the next clinging to me because she did not want to say goodbye to the tree in the yard. I kept telling her we were moving toward something, not just away from something, even though in my own chest it felt very much like running. My mother-in-law did not come by that day. I had not told her the exact date, and I made sure the movers came early. Part of me was relieved she was not there to stand in the driveway and make a scene about how I was stealing her family. But another small, petty part of me wanted her to pull up and find the driveway empty, just so she could have a taste of showing up somewhere she thought she controlled and finding it gone. Yeah, I know, not my most mature thought, but I am not pretending to be the bigger person here. I am just being honest. The apartment in the new city was smaller, but it felt lighter the moment we walked in. No one had a key except me. There was no history soaked into the walls, no echoes of arguments or backhanded compliments. Just blank space and the smell of fresh paint. I set up my daughter's bed first, because that is one of my weird rules about moving. The kid gets stability before the boxes get sorted. Then I assembled my desk in the corner by the window, connected my computer, and logged into my new job portal. My life was still chaotic, but at least my chaos was not being micromanaged by someone who thought boundaries were a personal attack. I did tell my husband where we were, obviously. I was not trying to disappear. I sent him the address, photos of the new place, little videos of our daughter giving him a tour through the phone. He said all the right things. "Looks great. I am proud of you. I cannot wait to see it in person." But underneath that, I could feel the tension. His mother was still in his ear. I knew because even from a distance, she found ways to make her presence known. She sent him long messages about how hard it was to go from seeing her granddaughter all the time to barely talking to her. She told him that one day our daughter would blame him for letting me take her away. She played the victim flawlessly. I kept my line simple. She was not banned from seeing her granddaughter forever, but she was not going to have unsupervised access anymore, and she was absolutely not going to have my new address. I told him if he wanted to visit her with our daughter when he was back in the country, we could talk about it under very specific conditions. He said he understood, but then he would let little things slip in conversation. Mom asked if the new apartment is near a park. Mom wanted to know if you got settled in. Those might sound harmless, But when you know someone like my mother-in-law, you know every harmless question is actually data collection. I sent a formal complaint to my daughter's old school about the day they released her to my mother-in-law without my permission. It was not a screaming email full of threats. It was a detailed breakdown of what happened, why it was not okay, and how it could have ended very badly. A couple of weeks later, I got a response saying they had updated their procedures to require verbal confirmation from a parent before early pickup, even if the person was on the approved list. I printed that email and added it to the folder. It felt like building a case, even though at the time I was still hoping it would never come to that. For a little while, life in the new city almost felt normal. I took my daughter to her new school, filled out forms, explicitly wrote that no one except me and her father could pick her up, and underlined it for good measure. I went for walks around the block when work was slow, learning the faces of my new neighbors. My mother-in-law sent the occasional message directly to me, alternating between guilt and anger. One week it was, "I miss her so much, you are punishing me." And the next it was, "You are cruel, and one day she will hate you for keeping her from her real family." I started leaving those messages on read, sometimes not even opening them. I forwarded them to my email and then deleted them from my phone, adding them to the digital pile of evidence I never wanted to need. The calm did not last long, of course. My husband finally came home from deployment a few months after we moved, and I drove back to our old town so he could see his mother before we all went to the new place together. Yes, I know, that was a choice. I could have insisted he meet us in the new city directly, but I thought maybe if he had some time with her first, he would get whatever guilt trip she had prepared out of his system before we had to function as a family again. That was hopeful thinking on my part. When he walked through the door of his mother's house, she clung to him like he had just returned from a war zone, which technically he had, but her performance was still a little extra. She shot me a look over his shoulder that said, "He is mine," as clearly as if she had tattooed it on her forehead. I let them have their moment because I am not heartless, and because I knew that interrupting that reunion would only make me look like the villain she always paints me as. Later, when he and I were alone in the kitchen, he brought up the situation like it was a delicate topic at a dinner party. "Mom feels like you are cutting her out," he said, like that was news. I said, "I am limiting her access because she has proven she cannot be trusted with it." He said he knew what she did with the school was wrong, but that she missed our daughter and was willing to work on things. I almost laughed. Willing to work on things, in his vocabulary, meant willing to pretend everything is fine as long as no one asks her to change. We ended up agreeing on a very basic plan. When he came to the new city, if his mother wanted to visit, it would be at a neutral location with both of us present, and under no circumstances would she be alone with our daughter. He promised me he would not share the exact address of our new place with her. I believed him, or I wanted to. Looking back, I should have known. He had a lifetime of habit built up around telling his mother what she wanted to hear. Saying, "I will not tell her" to me, and then slipping up with some detail to her was almost muscle memory. The first time my mother-in-law showed up uninvited at the new apartment, my stomach dropped in a very familiar way. I opened the door to find her standing there with a fake bright smile and a bag of toys in her hands. Behind her in the hallway, my husband looked guilty as hell. "Surprise," he said, which might as well have been, "I broke the one clear boundary you set." I felt this flash of anger so sharp I had to grip the doorframe to keep from shaking. My daughter, hearing her grandmother's voice, came running and wrapped herself around her legs, excited. That made everything so much more complicated because I am not going to be the person who rips a child away from someone she loves in the middle of a hallway. So I swallowed it, let them inside, and sat through the most tense 2 hours of my life while my mother-in-law acted like nothing had ever happened. She complimented the apartment in that backhanded way, saying, "It is cozy," like that was not code for small. She asked questions about the neighborhood, the school, my job, all with this underlying tone of cataloging. My husband tried to play peacekeeper, cracking jokes, changing the subject whenever things got too close to the truth. When they finally left for a quick lunch together, I told my husband I did not want our daughter going. He swore they were just grabbing a bite at a place nearby and coming right back. I agreed on the condition that he keep his phone on and answer any calls immediately. Our daughter stayed with me. They went off together, and I spent the next hour pacing the apartment, my body buzzing with leftover adrenaline. Later, he admitted that over lunch he accidentally mentioned which school our daughter attended. Not because he wanted to give his mother weapons, but because he was used to talking to her about everything and it slipped out. He said it casually like, "Oh, she loves her teacher at this school." And I watched the color drain from his face even as he told me the story. He knew exactly how dangerous that little piece of information was, given her history. I tried not to completely lose it on him. I told him calmly but firmly that this was exactly why I had not wanted him to share details. That his slip did not happen in a vacuum. It happened because he could not accept that sometimes protecting our daughter meant not feeding his mother's endless curiosity. He apologized over and over. He promised he would talk to her again, make it clear that she was not allowed to go near the school. I nodded, but inside something heavy settled in my chest. It was the realization that I could not trust him to keep his mother out of certain parts of our life, no matter how many times he said the words. I wish I could say that warning sank in for him. It did not. The second time my mother-in-law tried to pick my daughter up from school, it did not go the way she planned, but it went exactly the way I had started to fear. I was working at my desk when my phone rang with the school's number again. That familiar little spike of anxiety shot through me, the one that used to live in my body full-time back in the old town. The secretary sounded different this time, though, more confident. She told me my daughter's grandmother was there, saying she had permission to take her home, but the staff had checked their notes and saw that only I or her father could authorize anything. They wanted to confirm with me before making any decision. For a second, I could not even answer. It was like my brain was flashing between memories. My daughter walking out of the old school holding a shopping bag, the police car in my mother-in-law's driveway, my husband's voice saying he accidentally mentioned the new school's name. It all connected in one ugly snap. I told the secretary absolutely not. Under no circumstances was my mother-in-law to take my daughter anywhere, and that I would be there as soon as possible. She said they would keep my daughter in the office and not allow anyone else to sign her out. The drive to the school felt both too long and not long enough. I kept my hands clenched on the steering wheel, repeating to myself that everything was okay, that this time the staff had done what they were supposed to do. When I pulled into the parking lot, my mother-in-law's car was already there. She was standing near the entrance with her arms crossed, looking like someone who had been denied what she believed she was entitled to. When she saw me walking up, her face twisted into this mix of hurt and fury that I had come to recognize all too well. Inside, my daughter was sitting on a chair near the front desk, swinging her legs and looking confused. The secretary had this protective posture, like she was physically ready to block anyone from getting too close. I thanked her, out loud, with my daughter listening. Then I took my kid's hand and turned to my mother-in-law. For the first time, I did not lower my voice, did not pull her aside, did not try to smooth anything over. I told her clearly enough for the secretary and anyone else nearby to hear that she was never again to show up at my daughter's school, and that what she was doing was not loving, it was terrifying. She said, "I am her grandmother, I have rights." And I said, "You had trust, and you broke it. That is what you had." She accused me of turning her son against her, of using our daughter as a weapon. I told her if she truly cared about her granddaughter, she would stop making everything about her own pain. It was not my most eloquent speech. My voice shook, my hands shook, my daughter's eyes were wide, and I could feel the secretary's gaze on us, like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. My mother-in-law actually tried to step closer to my daughter, and I moved between them without even thinking. When we got back to the apartment, I called a lawyer. I had already done some research after the first school incident, so I knew what I was asking for. I wanted to file for divorce, and I wanted emergency temporary orders that would address custody and make it crystal clear that our daughter could not be left with his mother unsupervised. It felt surreal to say the words out loud. Divorce had been floating around my brain as a maybe for a while, but saying it to a stranger's voicemail made it solid. I was not making this decision out of a single argument or a bad week. I was making it because I realized there was no universe where I could keep my daughter safe and emotionally stable, while being tied to a family system that treated my boundaries like suggestions. When I finally got the attorney on the phone, I laid everything out. The texts, the surprise school pickup, the police report, the new incident, the pattern of my husband minimizing his mother's behavior, the long-term emotional harassment. I did not have to dramatize anything. The facts were dramatic enough. The lawyer was calm and matter-of-fact. She told me we could file for divorce and an emergency protective order that specifically limited my mother-in-law's contact with my daughter. She said judges see this kind of thing more often than people think, which was both comforting and depressing. Filing the paperwork felt strangely anticlimactic. There was no dramatic soundtrack, just me sitting at my desk, signing my name over and over while my daughter colored at the table. I explained it to her in the simplest terms I could, that Mommy and Daddy were not going to live together anymore, but that she would always have both of us, and that my job was to keep her safe. She asked if Grandma was mad at her. That question broke something in me. I told her, "None of this is your fault. Grown-ups make grown-up messes. You just get to be a kid. I do not know if she believed me, but she nodded and went back to her drawing. The court date for the temporary order came faster than I expected. Because of everything going on in the world, a lot of it happened over video, which is a wild way to have your life discussed, by the way. There I was, sitting in my tiny apartment, my laptop propped up on a stack of books, listening to lawyers and a judge talk about my marriage and my child while I tried to keep my internet connection stable. My husband appeared on screen from a separate location, looking wrecked. My mother-in-law was not a direct party to the case, but her shadow was all over it. The messages, the school incidents, the way her behavior had pushed me to this point. The judge was not dramatic. He did not give a big speech. He looked at the documentation, asked a few questions, and then laid out the temporary orders. Primary physical custody with me, shared legal custody with both of us. Specific exchanges for my husband's parenting time when he was back in the area. And very clearly, conditions that neither of us could allow our daughter to be left alone with my mother-in-law, that nobody except the two of us could pick her up from school, and that any contact with his mother had to be supervised by one of us. If anyone violated that, there would be consequences, up to and including revisiting custody. Hearing those words felt like standing on solid ground after years of walking on a floor that might give out. When the hearing ended, the screen went dark, and I just sat there for a second, staring at my reflection. I did not feel victorious. I felt sad and exhausted and weirdly empty. This was not the life I thought I was signing up for when I married a man in uniform and imagined building a family. I had not pictured judges and lawyers and emergency orders. But I also felt this tiny spark of something like relief. For the first time, there was a written line that someone outside of my messy family system had drawn, and it matched the line I had been trying to hold on my own. The house sale finally closed a few weeks later. The money hit my account, and I used it to buy a small house in the new city. Nothing fancy, but mine in a way that felt different this time. It was not a symbol of compromise or a place where I had to constantly defend my right to exist. It was simply a home for me and my daughter. I signed the papers with a kind of quiet defiance, thinking about how my mother-in-law used to act like any property connected to her son was hers by extension. This one was not. This one never had his name on it, never had a spare key with her fingerprints. My husband pushed back against the divorce at first. He said we could do counseling, start over, set new boundaries with his mother. I told him I had been setting boundaries for years. The problem was not the lines I drew. It was his refusal to stand on the same side of them with me. He said he could change. Maybe he could. But I was tired of waiting for hypotheticals while my daughter learned from watching all of us that love meant constantly swallowing your own needs to keep the peace. I told him that if he really wanted to prove he had changed, he could start by respecting the court orders and the limits around his mother. That would be better for our daughter than any dramatic romantic gesture. He comes to see our daughter now on a regular schedule. Sometimes they go to a park, sometimes they stay at my house. We talk more like co-workers than spouses, polite and careful. But it is honest in a way our marriage never fully was. He still talks to his mother, obviously. I am not trying to police that. But he knows that if he ever tries to sneak her back into our daughter's life in the way he used to, there will be legal consequences, not just emotional ones. The difference now is that I am not the only one saying it. A judge has it in writing. As for my mother-in-law, she occasionally sends me messages that swing wildly between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of ripping her family apart. I rarely respond. When I do, it is with 1 or 2 sentences that could be read aloud in a courtroom without making me cringe. My daughter still asks about her sometimes. I tell her the truth in kid-sized pieces. That grandma loves her, but that grown-ups sometimes make choices that are not safe or kind, and that until that changes, visits have to be limited. I do not badmouth her grandmother, but I do not sugarcoat the situation either. If there is one thing I refuse to pass down, it is the habit of pretending things are fine when they are not. I am not going to lie and say I never miss the idea of what I thought my family would be. I do. Some nights, after my daughter is asleep and the house is finally quiet, I sit on the couch and let myself grieve. Not just the marriage, but the dream of in-laws who would show up with casseroles and gentle advice instead of judgment and power plays. The dream of holidays that did not feel like walking into a courtroom in someone's living room. I let myself feel all of it, and then I look around at the little house I fought for and remember why I did it. I chose peace over proximity. I chose sanity over appearances. I chose my daughter's sense of safety over my husband's comfort in not upsetting his mother. It was not clean, it was not pretty, and it definitely did not make me the hero in anyone else's version of the story. In my mother-in-law's version, I am the villain who stole her son and her granddaughter. In my husband's version, on his worst days, I am probably the woman who gave up instead of fighting harder. In my own version, I am just a tired woman who finally realized that surviving is not the same thing as living, and that sometimes the most selfish thing you can do for your kid is refuse to let them grow up watching you slowly disappear to keep someone else comfortable. So yeah, if you look at my life from the outside now, nothing looks particularly dramatic. I am a single mom with a remote job, a mortgage, and a kid who leaves crumbs everywhere. I answer emails, I sign homework folders, I argue with utility companies when they mess up the bill. But there is a door on this house that only opens for people I actually invite in. And that might be the most dramatic plot twist of all. At least for me. I finally learned that I do not owe everyone access just because they share DNA with someone I used to sleep next to. And I am not even kidding. That realization has been worth every uncomfortable court date, every sleepless night, every signature on every tedious form. I did not get the fairy tale family, but I got my life back. One lock, one boundary, one hard decision at a time.